Hey guys, welcome back. It's Friday night at 10 o'clock. It's time for the Creative Cranium. I'd like to thank my guests for coming on tonight. We've got a great topic. Why don't we start by introducing ourselves? Most of us in this room know each other, but let's start by tell us who you are and what you're mostly known for. Phil, let's start with you.
Phil Russert, father, husband, comic creator by night, nurse by day, and I own Filbo Publishing, well, Filbo Entertainment Promotions with Filbo Publishing as a subsidiary. And my flagship title is Tragedy, and I have other titles out there, and I'm just, trying to be part of the community and create stories that everybody likes.
Welcome, Phil. It's always good to see you.
Thank you.
And Mark, we're meeting for the first time. I'm looking forward to hearing more about your work. Tell us who you are and what you're known for.
Yeah, hi. My name is Mark Bateman. This is actually, I'm new to the world of indie comics in the fact that I just finished my Kickstarter for the Project Valhalla, which is my comic book. But I'm a writer and a potter by trade. And so this comic book I actually started when I was 12 years old, and I'm 53 now, and it's been a long time coming. So I was so thrilled to actually start getting out here. And even though my Kickstarter finished last week successfully, I might add, I'm really happy to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, it's good to meet you. Recommended by our pal Aaron Dowan, who I just love that guy.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Caleb, great to see you as always. We've always seemed to end up on the same podcast, or at least several times in the past. Congratulations on your new Kickstarter. Of course, I'm familiar with us, but tell us who you are and what you're known for.
Yeah, so I'm Caleb Toussaint. I've done over 20, I'm up to 23 now Kickstarter campaigns. I've been doing it for quite a while. I have a series that went through SourcePoint Press called Nook. It's a World War II story. That's probably what I'm most known for. I also do a kids series on Scout Comics that's called Super Cats, and I have a bunch of other titles. My big one I'm finishing up right now is The Neverland, and we're running the hardcover trade and then the final 5th issue at the same time.
Very cool, very cool. I look forward to hearing more about that. And you know, man, it is just not the Creative Cranium until we have our hero, Mr. Matt Knowles.
A hero? Wow, man, that's a way to get introduced. Holy crap, man. I thought you were going to swerve and be like our hero, Phil Russert, but I'm like, I think he already introduced himself.
You know, for the guys that don't know, Matt and I have another similar interest. We're both classic metalheads, and we love to talk about music and drums and bass. So just about
I'm a drummer.
Yeah, I remember that. And by the way, I saw your YouTube video. You're a drummer.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, man. He was playing, I think it was YYZ in the video.
It was La Via Strangiato by Rush.
Strangiato, yeah. I remember it was and Neil was like, whoa, okay, he's not messing around. When he says he's a drummer, he's a drummer. So welcome to the show, guys. I'm going to dive right in. A lot of people have been talking this week. It'd be fair to say that we're all creative personality types. And the question that I wanted to ask is, out of all the creative things that we could have been doing, some of us are writers, some of us are musicians. I think I heard a potter in there. Why comics? Why did we gravitate toward making an art form that is, how do I put this gently? You know, comics is not necessarily ringing the bell in terms of income. Mm-hmm. Right? It's arguably one of the harder fields to break into. And there's certainly a lot of labor for the reward. So I'd like to hear why you all chose it. I'm going to start with Phil. Phil, why comics?
Well, two things for me. The first is, as far as medium, I think it's the best overall medium for entertainment because as someone who loves to read, but someone who loves movies, I think it brings the best features of those two together because with good sequential storytelling, panels are like stills frames of a movie, but yet you're also reading as well. So I love the medium. As far as why comics, as someone who had a very, very difficult childhood, they saved me, and they actually taught me morality. You know, they taught me the hero and the villain, and they taught me a better escape than substances and or bad behaviors and things like that. So I just developed an affinity for the medium, for what it did for me, and wanted to give back to the medium. And maybe, who knows, maybe someday somebody reads my books and they relate to the hardships of the characters that I write, and maybe it helps them in some way, because I think the best way to help people is to relate to them, and what better way than write stories that are compelling and relate to you.
Great answer. Great answer.
Oh, thank you, Dave.
Yeah. Let's jump over
I don't know him. I didn't pay him, I swear.
So, jump over to Mark here. Now, we're just meeting for the first time, so I was very interested in hearing about your project, and I understood. Did you say you're a teacher too, right?
No, well, I teach pottery, yeah, but I'm a writer and a potter. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. I say that without any irony. I'm interested in all the creative fields, and actually, pottery is super interesting to me. I'm a writer myself, but I'd like to know, Mark, if you're a writer, why did you gravitate to the comics field?
It's interesting. I went I got an MFA at University of San Francisco, and one of the things they always kind of shied away from was the idea of genre writing, but it took me a long time to kind of get away from that thought process. But really, what had happened was, when I was a little gay boy, honestly, I really appreciated the idea of what comic characters represented to me, which was a secret identity. Here they were acting one way to the world, but in reality, they were coming out. And even though, like the X-Men, for example, they were not accepted by the world, they were still being true to themselves and doing the right thing. And I think there's a lot of us like me who have gravitated towards comic books simply for that reason. And then, also I started writing this comic book basically because I got a role-playing game that was the Marvel Universe D&D kind of inspired game. And it allowed me to start creating characters. And it became my escape during my middle school and high school years. It was I basically created an imaginary world all to myself that allowed me to, have a pretty vivid imaginary world that kind of protected me from, 1980s, Reagan era world. And so I think that for me, it's the ability to just go anywhere with storytelling in comic books. I mean, there's so many different genres of really great art, but this is one of them that really the sky's the limit, and it's really just my imagination that's reining me in, really. So for that reason, I think it's got to be one of the best art forms, and definitely the best kind of writing.
Okay, when we come back around, I want to hear what some of your influences were too. But let's jump over to Caleb. So Caleb, you're similar too, right? Another writer. You could be, doing anything you wanted probably. What drew you to comics, and why did you stay there?
Well, I actually worked in film for about 9 or 10 years before I decided to write my first comic script. So I was producing independent films in Chicago and did short films and some features, and just I loved the collaboration and of the visual medium, but just the limitations of independent film, I just couldn't see that being the place for my ideas. So I actually really didn't get into reading comic books until I was in my 20s. I read a few things when I was younger, but once I read like Sandman and Watchmen, it kind of opened my eyes to kind of see that there's more to that medium, that more that I can do with it. So I just decided, well, hey, I think I can write some pretty cool stuff, and I have no limitations. Like Mark was saying, like sky's the limit. I can find a good artist that can that can kind of give me that collaborative feeling that I was having with film to a smaller scale, which was my big thing. Is I loved working in film, but there's so many people and so many egos and so much so much pulling back and forth to try to get a project done. Here I can work with a handful of people, and I can kind of build a world of my own with one or two artists versus trying to deal with these giant budgets and huge productions. So I decided comics just kind of made sense for me, and it was still that visual medium like film. So I still got that. I honestly, I had written scripts and stuff, so it was like very similar. You just had to kind of retool my mind to think in still images versus moving images. So it just, to me, it flowed and it made sense, and here we are 23 projects later.
Nice. Congrats, man. Your new project is burning it up, and I'm a fan of your work. I think you got some cool stuff, and I like it has kind of a literary flair too, which we'll come back to that in the second round. Let's jump over to Matt. Matt, same thing for you, right? You got a lot of creative things going on. What was it that you said, hey man, comics is the medium for me?
So I grew up as a metal musician, and everything was always stuff that was focused on music, but there was times when I was writing music that I would want to have like a concept piece or, some songs that like all told a story together. And when I got out of the music scene, I took a sabbatical for quite a while. It was one of those, I know I'll get back into it sometime, but it ended up being almost a decade because I was just burnt out. When I came back in, I wanted to write music, but I'm like, I want there to be more than just that part of the medium. I want there to be something else alongside of it that helps to bring the story that's being told into another medium. And it started, what I started to do started from ebooks, then turned into illustrated novels, turned into comics, especially when I started working with Steph Cannon, who's the other half of Insymmetry Creations. That's when it really became actual comics. I had a thought in my mind. I'm like, hey, cool. I'm going to play metal music and I'm going to write this comic. Look at my comic. And she's like, hey, this is really good. And I really like the concept you have here, but this really isn't a comic. This is kind of an illustrated novel. And if you want to have a comic, you need to use some word balloons. Let's see the word balloons in.
Sure.
But I agree with the thing you said at the beginning. The finances of comics really don't make sense. And that's one of the unfortunate things that, especially as a writer, the finances of comics are absolutely, they just don't make any sense at all. So I'm glad that there is a musical outlet. I'm glad that we're doing other things. Thank you, Nina, for putting the link up there.
She's the best.
I'm glad that, there's other things we can do to always try to, what we try to people that come to our booth at a show. We want the comics, but we want there to be other things as well, because we want it to be when you're done reading it and you put it away on the shelf, that the IP doesn't disappear onto the shelf with it, that you've still got these other things that help expand out the world. And we want to do a lot more things. We always want to have that visual medium that's there to help express the stories we're trying to tell.
Excellent answer. So in a quick, by a show of hands here, I think I got this right. We are all writers in this room, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
right.
Okay, so it's even more pertinent. So let's zero back around to the influences, and if there was a moment that put you right on it. I'll start with Phil. Phil, do you remember what your initial influences were in comics, or was there a title that you read and you said, man, I want to do this?
I was 9 years old, Spinner Rack, Uncanny X-Men 115 with Sauron on the cover, and Nightcrawler was fighting, dodging a swing by Wolverine.
Yeah.
The characters are just so fantastical. It caught my eye. I was just blown away. And then I started reading Claremont, and Chris Claremont, So I fell in love with Uncanny X-Men. Then John Byrne's artwork was just phenomenal for the short time he was with Claremont. And then, of course, other artists after were fantastic. But that's where it started for me as far as comics. And then, of course, once you get a taste of the drug, you try to venture out to other drugs. And there was Fantastic Four, and there was Avengers, and there was Daredevil, and there's so many, Peter David, and Howard Mackey and Chuck Dixon. There's so many writers that I could point to. But people tell me that they can see that I'm a big Claremont fan because I write for long term, as far as opening plot lines, etc. I'm not saying I'm on his level. He's a legend. I'm just saying, stylistically, I don't like to write self-contained stories. I like to write fantastic, these like open, like a spider web, I call it, where threads are opening up and new plots are coming. And as I'm closing some, new things that you didn't realize were being presented to you 3-4 issues ago are now at the forefront. Because to me, life is that spider web. Everybody is a subplot. Right? For the time that I know you in my life, you're a subplot, Timothy. And whether that's for the rest of my life or for a time, you're a subplot in my life, and I'm a subplot in yours, So I try to write in that real world sense, and not linear where, okay, here's a bad guy, we face it, it's over.
Mm-hmm.
because life is always throwing something at you, and there's somebody always coming in, and either they're mucking up the works and causing trouble, or they're making things easier. So I guess in that respect, I do have a great influence from Chris Claremont with writing.
Boy, man, that's a pretty solid influence. You can't really go wrong.
And I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. I read Lord of the Rings 3 or 4 times from the age of 9 years old. So, I mean, you can't, probably the greatest writer to me is Tolkien. And I mean, the guy created a language, the Elven language, and he created a world and races and just crazy. So those are probably been my biggest influences.
Yeah, that's a great one. A great answer. Mark, how about you? Did you have one influence? Were there several? And roughly when in your life were you younger? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny. I can piggyback off of a couple of things that Phil said, but I think that my very first true introduction to comic books was a cartoon on Saturday mornings when I was a kid called Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Sure.
And that was the one that where after that I decided I wanted to get comic books. So I got my first Spider-Man comic. And it was actually the first appearance of the Hobgoblin. I still remember it. I saw the comic book in a comic book store recently, and I said, "That's the first comic I ever got." But I think I agree with a lot of things that Phil was saying. My first real love in comic book storytelling was Byrne. So, there's no doubt about it. And specifically for me, and I think was probably my biggest inspiration in the direction I went with the storytelling for Project Valhalla was Alpha Flight.
Great series.
I loved especially the first, before it started going a little bit off the rails, but the different characters that were just so incredibly interesting to me. I just loved them and I identified with them. And so when I started to kind of create my own characters, I wanted them to be just completely random and completely unique in their own way. And so I think that was probably where I first started to really move towards the idea of creating a team that's made up of just like a random assortment. But then I'm also going to go back to what Phil said too. I think that Project Valhalla for me is a saga. It's not, while there is going to be every episode, there's going to be some kind of, battle or fight or some kind of movement with towards, an adversary and getting good versus evil. In the end of the day, it is like it is a true fantasy novel in the fact that it is going to have a really overarching storyline and does have an overarching storyline that you get hints from throughout. And that's absolutely directly because of my complete fascination with the Lord of the Rings. And, the way that he went all the way back to the beginning of time in order to create Middle Earth. It just was.
Are we Silmarillion people too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Me too.
I mean, maybe not so much the Amazon Prime show, but I definitely.
Oh yeah, right.
I know it's all about Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. It's funny to me. I like to give their answers, but I will chime in on that one. You gotta love a company who says, "Let's spend $1 billion on these beloved characters and storylines," and then they put it into production, and they go, "You know what? Let's just do our own thing, man."
Yeah.
Like, wait, why didn't you?
Material.
There's all these great stories that everybody loves. What are you doing?
to take it one step further, the Willow show. I'll tell you a little funny thing about Willow. So the Willow thing that was so pathetic and so bad that it's not even on Amazon anymore.
Right.
So I just did Spookala Horror Festival. I do all the panel interviews, all the celebrities, and one of the guys I did a panel with the Scream actors. And one of the guys in the most recent Screams was also one of the characters in Willow. And I can tell you right now, there was not one time in any way, in any shape that I ever mentioned the fact that Willow even existed to this dude, because I'm like, there's no way I'm bringing up Willow in front of 2,000 people, as bad as that show was, because his part wasn't bad. the show was just written so horribly.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we had some similarities there between Phil and Mark. I kind of want to hear from Caleb. So, Caleb, same for you. Do you remember when you received your influence, and roughly how old were you?
Yeah, so I come from a different background here. So it, again, was probably television, but it was probably the '90s X-Men that really got me aware of comics on my radar. I grew up in a town that didn't really have a bookstore or comics really like available to me. So that was like my first, hey, what are these superhero characters? And I got obsessed with X-Men, and then I got obsessed with Ninja Turtles, and then I found like the original Ninja Turtles comics, which are completely different than the cartoon. Like not even the same, not even close to the same thing, but it opened my eyes to kind of that world. But I didn't really dive hard into it until much later. When I was in college, really, I started learning about popular culture. I basically studied like media in terms of like how it's made in the time that it's made and how it reflects the time that it's made in. So basically, I got obsessed with all the writings and rewritings of Superman and Batman, because every time that character is rewritten, it kind of reflects the age and time that it's written in.
Yeah, well said.
And I kind of love that idea. And so basically, that's where all my stuff comes from. It's kind of, you can kind of see that I only write stuff that inspires me at the moment, and my stories usually reflect something that's going on in the world around me, whether it be personal or, national. It could be anything. Something that sparked something that, like, I wrote the World War II book when I saw the world kind of seeming like it forgot its past, and it's basically a story about learning from your past or being doomed to repeat it. And I wrote that basically like right before Donald Trump got elected president, and I didn't know he was going to be elected president, but that was kind of like a very timely thing to happen around when I wrote that. And I don't know, I love stories that kind of reflect the times that they're written in, and I'm very influenced by film. I mean, I came from a film background, so a lot of '80s fantasy movies, sci-fi stuff. It all
favorite movie of all time. I'm putting you on the spot. I got a gun on you. What's your favorite movie of all time?
Favorite movie to watch over and over again?
Yep, got to pick one.
I will say maybe Back to the Future 1 is probably up there.
Good
just pick. Something fun, and it's, I don't know.
That ages well too. It's funny to figure it's 40 years ago and it still is, kind of relevant.
It's probably one of the best screenplays ever written. I think it seems silly, but it's like, it's a well constructed story. And if you're going to like learn how to write a screenplay or a story, I think that's a great one to kind of learn from.
I appreciate that example. That's a pretty good one. Matt, how about you? So first of all, how old were you when you got the inspiration to try and make a comic? And secondly, was there one that was an influence where wow, this is so good, I want to make this?
So it's funny because I feel like my background is closer to Caleb's than anyone else on the panel. But it's not even really like Caleb's either. I would say I was probably, late 30s, early 40s before I was like, I want to include this medium in what I'm doing. But I mean, comics were always around. Like, I had a buddy of mine in high school that, I kid you not, he was like, man, let me give you this Ronin stuff. And there's this thing called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that you should really pick up. And it was like the original copies of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles where they all had the same color mask and all that. I'm like, if I only knew what I knew now, I would have accepted these things from him. But,
were you referencing, when you said Ronin, were you talking about Frank Miller's Ronin?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, he was into that stuff like back in the day. So,
yeah.
I was always like going to like the little toy shows and things like that. But myself and my youngest, who's now 18, we would go into there and we'd go to the $1.50 bins. And I'd always tell her, I'm like, we can go pick stuff out, but it can't be Marvel or DC. Our goal was dig through there for the most obscure titles so we could find the hidden gems that have gotten lost in there to see if we could find cool stuff, because we're like, every single one of these comics was somebody's baby. Somebody put tons and tons and tons of time into this story. And if they only knew that somebody was in there trying to find this title that now has been relegated to a 50-cent box in some back room at a hotel comic show. But I always like stuff like that. I mean, obviously being into steampunk and the steampunk stuff that I do, Lady Mechanica was something that I always thought was really cool.
It's Joe Benitez?
Joe Benitez, yeah. But again, for me, it was like, I always liked, let me say this, I'm not somebody that is a gatekeeping traditionalist. And what I mean by that is like, if there's a book and then there's a movie adaptation, and I'm not the one that's like, I don't give a crap what the book did compared to what the movie did, as long as the movie is good in its own right and it doesn't completely go opposite to what the book was. If they make changes for the medium, hey, it is what it is. As long as that is good. Huge Lord of the Rings fan. Obviously, I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. Always been into fantasy, always been into stuff like that. And I'm like, what can I do to be able to create these fantasy stories? Within Symmetry Creations, we say we want to create characters you can relate to and universes you want to escape into. And that's always been my thing. What kind of fantasy world can I help to create so that anybody on this panel could go and read one of the books that we have and be like, you know what, I can find a little bit of myself in there. It doesn't have to be the obvious. It could be, hey, character A thought everything was going to be normal and some supernatural thing happened and he reacted to it. Every one of us can say, yeah, I wonder what I would do if I was in that situation and some supernatural thing happened. Phil Russert might react one way, Caleb might react another way. You all might react, but it's kind of neat because you could see, well, maybe I would have been the good guy in this situation. I would have taken the high roader. Maybe I would have just, this is my chance to go do something that nobody's going to ever catch me for. That's where my inspiration in comics right now is the easiest medium to be able to get that out into.
Good answer. I'll just touch on it. My answer is probably a little bit similar to Mark in the sense that, I wasn't exactly a popular kid. I was kind of a nerdy little kid. And I knew that I loved Tolkien, I loved Isaac Asimov, and I loved Harlan Ellison. Can you imagine what kind of kid loves those three things? So I didn't see eye to eye with most other kids. And the other thing, of course, I liked comics, and most of the ones that you guys have mentioned, I've loved. But I can remember one of my favorites was Marvel 2-in-1. And maybe you don't remember, but it was a book with the Thing, and it was like a guest of the month. Well, the Thing and Spider-Man, then it'd be the Thing and, the Hulk. Well, that made me realize, this is like a world. These guys all know each other. Of course, for me, it was the beginning of world building. And I abandoned comics for many years after that. And it wasn't till something called the Vertigo line came out, if you guys remember that. I think Caleb mentioned the Sandman. And that was when guys like us started to say, wait a second, comics can be well written. These are great stories. And of course, right around the corner from that was Alan Moore. And, that's when I was pretty much hooked. But, since we're all writers, one of the things I like to do on the show, I like to break down not only why we made it, but kind of how we made it. And what I mean by that, I talked a little bit about world building. All of us have a significant amount of lore in our projects, right? So I want to start with Phil. Phil, when you're making these, do you start out with the characters first? Do you start out with the world? Like, what's step one in a Phil Russert script?
Normally, an idea would just come to me. I don't try to force anything. I'm very fortunate not to get into writer's block, and I think it's because I don't worry about it. I just do it. I just tell stories as if I was sitting down with my kids and a flashlight in a tent telling a story. Obviously, you go back and you edit and you fix things and you tighten it up. But so usually I get the premise and an idea, and I just sit down and start writing, and the characters kind of writes itself through me. I don't know if that sounds like a cop-out answer, but the characters start to develop themselves as I write it. And I think creating the situation creates the character for me. Because touching on what Matt said, how would you react to the situation? And I'm 51, so I've been around a few times and I've met a lot of different people, different personalities, and you draw from all of that. So you kind of know the many different ways people respond to a situation. So I think I come up with the situations, a vague notion of who the characters are, and they develop themselves through how I put them through the ringer and how they just respond. But I mean, obviously, I do create the protagonist first, with a general sense of who they are. And usually, they say writers write from what they know. Sometimes they're a little bit of me. Sometimes maybe they're a little bit of my wife or someone I know or a good friend or someone I admire. And it's just pulling from the human element. I mean, honestly, we have a plethora of source material around us all day. I mean, there's 5 of us here with distinct personalities that just our body language and how we're responding when we speak is a notation of personality. The words we choose, the passion we put in when we talk, and these are all the things that I just log in and put into characters. So,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Mark, how about you? Congratulations on your book. When you were making do you start with a script? Do you start with a character? Do you start with the world and you populate it? What's step one for Mark?
The step one for me is creating these characters' bios, finding out how they think, what they do, what their history is, and really kind of defining each one really strongly in my mind, so that when I'm actually starting to tell the story, I know how they're going to react in the situations and the scenarios. And so I got really fascinated by the kind of the who's that they used to do in Marvel.
Yeah, and absolutely, sure.
And I think that kind of really got me interested in that part of it, and really figuring out what their powers are exactly, figuring out where they came from, all those kind of things. And from there, it just spiraled into crazy worlds and universes and alien empires and all the other things that we people with active imaginations create. So that's really my strategy, is figure out the characters and then the story leads to that.
That sounds like a pretty solid strategy.
Yeah.
Caleb, how about you? We mentioned earlier, you always have sort of a literary flair to the books, and I mean that in a very positive and complimentary sense. I hope you take it that way. But how do you start, right? Do you make your characters first? Is there a dialogue? In Caleb's books, what's step one?
I would say there's 2 things that usually hit me. It's either I think of an interesting character, but more than likely I think of a situation, or for instance with Neverland, it was Peter Pan during the pandemic. It was watching my kid grow up in the pandemic. So it was just that immediately sparked a whole world in my head of what I could do with that. And then
it goes with your theory of reflecting the
and I kind of built the characters within that. And then I kind of do the same thing as Mark, where it's I like to go in and kind of, even if it's a short bio or something, just to give the characters their own solid voice. Because for me, if I don't do that, then everyone ends up kind of sounding the same. So I'll go and I'll give even if it's just a few paragraph bio of the character of where they come from, it gives them their own distinct voice, and then I can go and plug them into that world that I originally thought of. And that just doing that alone usually gives me the beginning, middle, and end, and then I can kind of build it from there. That's usually how it works for me.
Thanks for sharing that, Caleb. You made a great point about each character's unique voice. As I'm fond of mentioning, I got my start by being endlessly rejected for animation shows. And one of the things that they say, and it's equally true in comics, it's a visual medium. But if somebody steps in and turns the lights off and you're looking at a black scene and there's 3 characters in there, when they start talking, you should be able to tell who's talking by their mannerisms.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the hardest things to do.
Absolutely.
It's tricky. Yeah.
And now that I tell you that, I do that sometimes as an exercise. Pretend there's no art, there's nothing. and the reader has to determine who is speaking by what they say.
Well, and sometimes if you get to a point where you're like, you run into a problem, you can go back to those and you can either take something from them, those bios, to kind of make the story continue, or to play off of something that happened to that character, or you can add to the bio to it makes
It'll be the spin-off for the next book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
sure. So Matt, how about you? Like when you're do you start with scripts? Do you start with dialogue? Do you start with the setting?
So I think that this is actually a very interesting topic, especially with the campaign that we have running right now for Tales from Nocturnia, the complete legendary saga that's got 6 days left. So when I look at the main titles that we have, I Am Keto did start from a individual person. Misfits Clubhouse, we had the characters for, we had the stories. Tales from Nocturnia, the guy in the front there, the executioner, he actually came from a single panel in our story, Heirs of Isildur. So Heirs of Isildur is steampunk time travel. People are getting pulled through portals into this one little steampunk village. And one of the people gets pulled through is a medieval king. And he's talking about what happened prior to him getting pulled through this portal. And there was this big scene where he went to execute his best friend for having an affair with the queen. When he does this, the queen jumps to her death as the blade falls on this best friend's neck. And we told the artist what we wanted in the panel, and the executioner was just kind of like a non-playable character kind of thing. He was just there in the story. And the way that the artist drew him, Steph and I kept coming back to that one panel. We're like, I wonder what's going on in this dude's head. He just saw this, and we kept going back, and we're like, man, you know what? We really need to expound out on this thing. And that turned into a 3-issue miniseries with all different kinds of anthology pieces written. And it's now like, we did a 152-page graphic novel version of it when we collected everything together. But we got to 2023 where we knew we needed to get some more printed up. And we're like, we did this a few years ago when we were still learning how to work together and I was still learning how to letter, and we really need to go back and revamp it. So that's why we have this campaign up there now. It's 160 pages, all completely relettered. But to answer to your
quick
point,
question, how many of us are letterers in this room? Yeah, I'm an amateur letterer.
Yeah. For that story, it's 100% started off with that one character. That one character, we knew what he needed to have. We knew what were the things that were going to be his tenets? What were the things where maybe he was going to skirt some gray lines? But yeah, a lot of times it starts there. Now, without making the long story longer, in Heirs of Isildur, because of being a musician, there were times that I had these songs that were written, and maybe they came from real life experiences of people. And I'm like, okay, here's the challenge. How can I take this song and make this the backstory of a character that's in Heirs of Isildur? So that's why the Crossroads Conundrum, you've got 12 songs on an album, and there's spots in the book that'll say, you want to know more about Shiver's backstory? Go listen to this song, because that's the lyrics that help to expand his story out. So a lot of times it's about characters, but yeah, there's a lot of different ways we go about it.
Yeah, I really dig how you guys have tons of lore and tons of world building in your series. But look, I'd be a liar if I didn't mention here, my main draw is that you're the only other person who's doing something similar to me, which is releasing songs with their comics. And,
That's
you know,
right.
I have a quick story I like to tell. Remember, I was involved in trying to make this animated project, and it was like a CD that had a fold out with all these animated characters in it. And that was the first time we went, wait a minute, this might be a pretty cool comic. In my case, I do it a little bit different than everybody. I choose the emotional ending, and I make the last page, and I write it backwards.
Yep.
Show how everybody
Yes. That's exactly what I tell people. I write backwards. I know where I'm going, and I figure out how to build up to it.
Yeah, I do. I start on the last page and I write it backwards. And then it's like a drum solo. And then, you know, the last page in my case is the first page, and that's the big splash. It's the symbol. There's a lot of, we talked about this before, there's a lot of allegory between music and comics. But let's jump over. I want to hear a little bit about what you guys are making, and we want to talk about that. So Phil, man, Tragedy looks great. Can you tell us a little bit about who will love this book?
Okay, so I mean, the campaign is mostly about a large. It's kind of like the IDW sequential art books, but it's my version. But it also does have the trade paperback. So basically, this is if you took Big Trouble in Little China, Kill Bill, and John Wick and Boondock Saints and threw them in a blender, and then added my own flavor. That's what you've got. It's basically I like heroes that don't win all the time, because if the villain is not a challenge, how can they really be a hero? They have to lose. Mm-hmm. And in real life, we lose. I mean, that's why we loved Empire Strikes Back, right? Because the good guys got their asses handed to them. Sorry.
Great example. Great example.
And you know, you left that going, oh my God, these guys just got totally annihilated. How do you come back from this? So Tragedy is a character that she's a little of all of us. She's facing her own inner demons, her own insecurities, she hates her own life. She hates waking up every day. How many of us, we wake up when the alarm clock goes off and we don't want to go to the job that we go to there. So we want to curl back up in the fetal position and just, that's it. I'm done. Clock me out. I'm out. So she's dealing with her life being taken from her. She's dealing with a life she doesn't want, and the struggle of thinking that she will never have the life she wants. You know, she's given into that despair, so to speak, that she's just going through the motions. And I feel like a lot of people in life are just going through the motions. They're not living. We're not living. We're surviving. Mm-hmm. And that's the allegory here, is that she's just surviving and she's thinking she's living, but she's not. And it's a journey of her finding a life. But while she's finding that life, she's fighting metahumans and there's Chinese mysticism and martial arts and rival mafias and vengeful cyborgs, and there's a lot of twists and turns. I'm told, I'm not saying this, but I'm told I'm really the cliffhanger king, that I'm good at making people at the end of the issue go, what the hell? At the very end of the first issue, actually, I had a cliffhanger. Sean Chen goes to me, how the hell do you do that and end the first issue like that? So it makes me proud. I like to write stories that are very character driven with the action, because we also got to remember they're in spandex for a reason, and nobody wants them just hanging out and having coffee all day. What's his name said in Godzilla, let them fight. So I'll have, like, my first issue is 30 pages, and of the 30 pages, honestly, I think 15 or 16 are fighting. But in the exposition that goes on in the other 14, you get to really understand this is a guarded person. This is a person that is she's fighting on both fronts, externally and internally, as we all are. And she doesn't trust very easily, and she's got her walls up. And I think you can write in a way where you don't have to do an exposition dump, and you don't have to write War and Peace, because in real life you can tell certain things from people by a quick sentence that they say, or inflection or tone or the words they choose. So that's kind of how I write dialogue. But this campaign, as well as having the trade paperback, which is I have a Bill Sienkiewicz cover, a Chris Picciolo cover, and a David Mack cover on it that you can choose from. And
hold one up here. Hold on, let me.
It's a thick book.
Hold it up, and I'm going to give you a solo layout. It's all you, brother.
It's a thick book. I even have a manga version on the back of one of them.
Well, it's a nice looking book, Phil.
Thank you. So it's Ricardo Silva does an amazing job on the interiors. Chuck Dixon did a forward in this because he thinks it's a really well written book. So does Peter David, and so does Howard Mackey, which is a dream come true for me that those three think it's well written.
You definitely got some power hitters on that team, man. You're dropping some bread, Phil.
Well, I run my own shows in New York, so I've made a lot of friends in the industry, which has been very fortunate for me, thankfully. So I decided to take people kept asking me to sell the interior pages, but I don't want to. And I have a lot of big name covers like Bill Sienkiewicz, and I own all the original covers. So I decided to make my own version of an IDW artist edition. It's the sequential edition. Gotcha. It's without lettering. It's 192 pages, and it's all the books, the sequential books at 11 by 17, all the sequential art, 11 by 17, and then the covers on the back. So lovely. Like we have Jose Luis, and we have Kevin West, Tyler Kirkham, Will Spertasio. Yeah, so they're all in here, and this thing will kill you if it lands on you. It's a hardcover. It's 11 by 17. I just know if anybody breaks in the house, I'm not going for a gun. I'm going for this, because if I whack you in the face, you're done.
We'll do a quick call to action. That's Tragedy, Sequential Art Edition, the Tabloid SARS hardcover. That's on Kickstarter right now. So backers, jump on over and check that one out.
And there is original art you can buy, by the way. I'm sorry, real quick. The Bill Sienkiewicz original is available on there, and some other original art.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Perfect. You're welcome, sir. Mark, man, congratulations on your project. This is your first one, you said, right?
It is my first one, and it just finished last week and actually fully funded, which I couldn't be more happy about.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about who is going to love Project Valhalla?
So, I think that this is the fundamental thing about this story is it's a mystery that is solved, is looking to be solved, but in a very long-term overarching story that reveals itself throughout the run. Hopefully will be many, many stories, episodes, issues. But, the thing about it is that these characters begin to have a dream that they don't actually, it's of a woman in stars, and it's very vague. They don't really know what's going on. They don't even realize there's any connection. And then eventually what happens is one of the characters, whose name is Scion, he's a telepath, receives an image of where to go, and they end up at the cemetery. And unbeknownst to them, there's 8 other characters who have been brought there too with the same dream. They get there, and there's a grave site that they figure out, because he's a telepath, that the body that's buried below where they've been brought is alive. And so they exhume the body, and the woman who, when they open up the coffin, is exposed. They don't have any idea. She doesn't have any idea what's going on. So then they're like, well, what do we do now? And that's really the beginning of the story. And so they decide to kind of band together and figure out where to go. And so the first issue that is actually, it's actually a 100-page graphic novel, is the origin, plus they end up going and helping one of the characters kind of save their city from his father who had become insane. This
is pretty deep, man.
It's pretty deep. I mean, I told you I've been doing this since I was 12.
Yeah.
So anyway, so what happens is that's the first half of the graphic novel. The second half is a who's who, of the characters, a little breakdown of the universe to kind of explain it, because it is all in my head. And the thing that I learned when I was actually doing this whole process was how I needed other people to help me with it. I got Joe DeSantos as an artist, who's, I don't know if you know his work, but he's fantastic. And then Aaron Dowan, who we mentioned earlier, who helped me to edit it, because it was so in my brain. I couldn't get away from it. I couldn't have enough distance in order to tell the story the way I really wanted to. And so having them kind of help me work through it to really, sharpen it and make for a really great story was the key to the success of this. So I think the person who's going to like this is going to want to really enjoy kind of figuring out what's going on. We talked about, someone mentioned earlier about, you have this story where there's a fight in the issue, but then at the end of the issue, there's little hints that are leading to bigger stories. And that's really, that's really where its fascination is with people, I think. And also the characters are really interesting. They've all got really in-depth stories, backstories. And I think that people who like this kind of stuff, who like genuinely good, well-designed characters, will really like this story.
It sounds really good, Mark. And I want to congratulate you. And also thanks for coming on the show. This is the first time we met, and I'm glad you
I got a quick question for Mark. When you had when you had his campaign pulled up, Mark, you had 49 backers. Yeah. And you reached $5,000. That is an incredible.
Yeah, this guy, they're spending some money.
Per backer. That's over $100 per backer, which is, when you're at our level, if you've got something like that, did you have other tiers there? Do you have other add-ons? What do you
How'd you do it? How'd you
add-ons.
do it?
We had it all. We had, we had merch for certain tiers. We had actually a variant cover at a certain amount of money. We had, I mean, we were gone all the way down to having, trade metal, trade cards that were metal, that kind of thing. And then the one thing we did do, which I thought was kind of interesting, is Joe actually did a specific, just drawing of one of the characters that is going to go to anyone that reaches a certain tier. And so it's going to be unique to them and no one else is going to get it.
That's
so
awesome.
we did those kind of things. And I do have to admit, having talked about this stuff since I was a wee lad, I had a lot of friends and family who wanted to support me on this. And one of the reasons I'm so happy to be here is because, I did get a lot of friends and family supporting me, but what I really want people to see is the people who truly love this art form and get them to actually learn to love this story as much as I do. Because you mentioned earlier, Matt, it's my baby. This is truly my baby. And I love it so much. I just want other people to be able to enjoy my creation. And, that's really why I'm here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I appreciate your passion.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, and you guys know I've been a fan of Caleb's work. I've been trumpeting about this tonight. It's got a really nice literary flair, and he's also got a strong track record of fulfilling campaigns, as do most of my guests tonight. So this is something you can back with confidence. Congrats, Caleb, the five-figure man. Caleb, I know a little bit about this series, but can you tell us who is going to love the Neverland?
Yeah, so this is my first time doing something that kind of builds off of something that already exists. So if you like Peter Pan and darker fairy tale stories, immediately you're gonna like this. But it's kind of my love letter to like 80s fantasy films. So we were talking about Willow, but I'm talking about the movie Willow, not the garbage sequel series. But Lord of the Rings, obviously, this is a story about a character who gets swept up into an epic fantasy and meets quirky characters along the way, and we all are familiar with those type of stories. But I wrote something that basically came out of watching my son grow up during the pandemic, and he kind of got obsessed with it's called Jake and the Neverland Pirates. It's like this semi-crummy Disney sequel to Peter Pan. But he got obsessed with that, so I kind of was like, hey, let's check out the original Peter Pan story. Like, I picked up the book and read it, and it was way different than anything I had ever seen with Peter Pan. Like, it's not really appropriate for children, and I probably shouldn't have read it to my child. But there's scalping, and it's dark, but it sparked something in my head watching my son dealing with all of the crap that was going on in the world and kind of being forced to deal with adult situations when he was 3 years old. I was like, hey, this is a story. This is a story in this world of Neverland. So it's about this young boy who his mother gets sick during a global pandemic and he escapes to Neverland one night. It's a story that his mother tells him all the time about Peter Pan. So he escapes to Neverland and he finds that the magic is all lost from the island. So he kind of embarks on this crazy quest to kind of discover what happened since the original Peter Pan novel. And so we play off of things that happened, the lore that actually is from that original novel. So it's darker, it's timely. He gets to kind of figure out what happened to these characters that we're all familiar with, but we get to see this gritty change that has happened to this island. And I think if you like darker fantasy stories, if you like stuff like the old Jim Henson Labyrinth and Dark Crystal and stuff like that, like that I was inspired by the things that I grew up with, stories that are great epic fantasy stories, and when you're a kid, you just love them for that fantasy. And as you get older, you look at them and you realize that there's so much more depth going on, and there's so much more to these stories. Like the biggest one that I probably pull from is probably the Neverending Story. It's just something that it has like this metaphysical depth to it that you just don't grasp when you're a child, but as you become an adult, there's just so much more to it. You can come back to it again and again, and you're going to get more out of it as you get older. And I wanted to write something for my kids and for like a new generation of kids to kind of, not only kids, but like parents of kids that can kind of experience that again, because I feel like there's a lack of that type of fantasy story in the world right now. So I don't know. I hope that this is like a story that kids can pick up that lived through all of this and kind of relate to, and parents can do the same thing. You know, as we all lived through this weird world where everything was kind of shut down for 2.5 to 3 years, and I think the people that lived through it were changed, and it's a story about kind of learning to accept that change and let the world be something new. So
looks good, man. Call to action. That's on Kickstarter right now. That's the Neverland. Readers, if this sounds like your bag, go over there and check it out. You still have 8 days to go. Let's get this thing funded.
And let me throw one more thing in there. I'm giving away the original variant. Every issue we do like a homage to an 80s fantasy movie. So, cool. We did Star Wars for the last one. And if you just for buying at the graphic novel level, you get entered into a drawing I'm gonna do a live stream and give that away on May 4th,
nice.
The end of the campaign. So it's like, Star Wars Day, Free Comic Book Day, you can get
tie it all in together. Well, best of luck with that one. Matt, I'm going to give you the final word tonight, buddy. You got Sounds 3 minutes. Man. Tell us why.
3 minutes, super quick.
Tell us who will love Tales from Nocturnia.
So Tales from Nocturnia, if you're a fan of Legend or Lord of the Rings, World of Warcraft, Dungeons and Dragons, Game of Thrones.
Matt, I love every one of those things.
Yes. That is why you want to get Tales from Nocturnia. One of the cool things about it, it's a story of Beninoc the Executioner who's trying to get out of the family business, but the kingdom around him is falling apart, keeps trying to pull him back into a life of violence. This has been our most popular story. People really love that, not just the arc where he's concerned, the kinds of reveals, the kind of things that are planted in the story that make you have a whole different experience when you read it the second time, especially like we did the first issue. There are so many things that were implanted in there. We had a reveal at the end of the issue and people were like, what the heck? And then they went back and looked, they're like, holy crap, you hid this thing in plain sight from us so many times in the issue. We had no idea we should be paying attention to this. It's a good story. One of the things that Phil said that I absolutely agree with is that you can't just write a story where you've got every character is black and white, good and evil. There has to be some characters that are always good and some characters that are always evil. But most characters in the middle are going to be, most of the time I'm good, but there's some darkness to me and I might do some bad stuff, or vice versa. There might be somebody who's a bad character that becomes a little more redeemable, that if you just make it so cut and dried, the story becomes boring and it just becomes caricatures. Right. That's not what Tales from Nocturnia is. It's very well developed. It's the full arc. We have some great merch out there, some of our most popular merch, whether it's t-shirts, socks. We've got some leather work. If we can finally get to the minimum funding level, which now is only $177 away, we have some great new stuff that we finally can put some pictures up for, but we got to get there first. So please, we are begging people, help us get 177.
Call to action.
So we can,
I'm telling you, I'm a backer of Matt's projects, and these are always good. There's tons of great merch. Satisfaction is 100% guaranteed. I will say that.
There's half a dozen metal songs that go along with it too.
Oh man, you had me at hello. I think we could all benefit from more music. So guys, we are just about to our time. Before we wrap this up, I really want to say thanks for coming on the show and sharing the information about your writing process and about how you make things. It's fascinating to me, and I hope the viewers also find it interesting. It's something that I never get tired of hearing it. And I wish you every bit of success with these projects. As for the rest of us, this is the Creative Cranium. We're going to see you every Friday night at 10 o'clock. I guess I should mention, if anybody would like to see me tomorrow, I'm going to be at the 4-State Comic-Con.
Do it.
50,000 square feet of celebs, comics and toys, art, collectibles, cosplay, and more. Come on over and see me. If that's too far away, well, then just come see us. Next week, we'll be on the Creative Cranium. So good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.